My son was, all of a sudden a teenager, quarterback of the football team. But my kids weren't really coming to me anymore. I was just so heads down. Things were going amazing at my lab but at home it was a completely different story.
Jeff, great to see you today. Thanks for joining me on the Order of Man podcast.
Yeah, great to meet you. Thank you.
I get a lot of books in the mail. I get a lot of requests to come on the podcast, but when your team reached out and I saw a little bit about what you're up to, and of course I've read your book now. I've got 2 copies, the paperback and the hardcover. I got both. They were pretty good about that. I was really excited because I think there's a real need to tap into nature, tap into our brains, but also it's just, we live in this incredible time in society, but it's also very overwhelming. At least it is for me. We're inundated with so much stuff on a daily basis that it's hard to cut through all the nonsense and really get to what matters in your life.
Yeah, I think it's very well said. We're being pinged left, right, and center. And as wonderful as all the technology is, we really need a strategy. We really need tools and things that we can look to every day to help us remain intentional and make deliberate decisions. And I've certainly gotten caught up in technology in various ways. I mean, one extreme case is that I got so far sidetracked that I'd be walking my dogs outside and watching Netflix at the same time. I'd be happy to go on like an hour walk just so I could watch a full show, not even paying attention to them, not even knowing like what they did or where I went. I couldn't even remember the route I took. I mean, that's how far I got.
Yeah, I remember there was an instance in my life where I remember vividly thinking, I'm going to drive home from work. Now, I don't drive home from work anymore. I work at my house. But when I was, drive home from work, and I'm not going to listen to anything. No podcast, no radio, no nothing. No books on tape, no CDs when that was a thing. And I'll tell you what, just that 20, 25-minute commute time of pure silence helped me transition into family man as opposed to businessman. That was a huge little small shift that I made in my life that really helped cut out some of the nonsense and clutter.
Yeah, what really did it for me was during COVID, this unintentional pause that we all experienced. And it really sent me into self-reflection mode. I had become a workaholic and become so productive, and there's a lot of reasons for it actually. Because back when I was in elementary school and high school, I mean, pretty much all of school, I really struggled a lot. And I had undiagnosed ADHD and learning differences. I didn't know it. My parents didn't know it. My teachers certainly didn't know it. And when I finally got identified in the 7th grade, it was this like window of opportunity open for me. And I'd been struggling so much and developing all these tools, but my tools really focused on productivity and efficiency. There was never enough time in the day, and things always kind of came slow to me. And then fast forward to COVID. I kind of looked up and my son was, all of a sudden a teenager, quarterback of the football team. But my kids weren't really coming to me anymore. I was just so heads down. Things were going amazing at my lab but at home it was a completely different story. And I really had to sort of hone in on some key tools to help me change my life around, prioritize, and really find ways to connect more deeply with my family and what's really most important.
Yeah, I'm sure it's powerful to have a litmus test. I work best under frameworks. If I have a framework for something, whether it's working out at the gym or ways that I might test business ideas or funnel them through so I can prioritize on what is the most important, that seems to be extremely productive for me. But I'm wondering, I don't know if everybody's like that. You seem to be a systems guy. I know a little bit about your story and your history and the technology and the biotech that you've been involved with innovation-wise. I don't know that everybody's like that, though. What do you think about that? Some of these guys don't seem to operate the same way that somebody like yourself might operate.
Yeah, I think what you're describing really is this just spectrum of neurodiversity, and it impacts kind of every area of life. Like even I'm a scientist. We develop new medical therapies, and when you even think about drugs that are being designed by pharmaceutical companies, often they only work for 30% of the population or 40% of the population. And so that's why we need multiple shots on goal. We need multiple tools and strategies. And, but one thing I think that really kind of brings people together, I mean, there's many things, but one thing in particular I think relevant to our conversation is neuroplasticity. This ability to rewire our brains, this ability to, we're born with this really large prefrontal cortex, relative to overall brain size. And that gives us remarkable capabilities as humans to problem solve and to think critically and to plan and to, make decisions. And we all have this capacity to, through practice, bolster connections in our brains, to create new connections, and to even, sort of remove old connections, prune them away. And I think that, to me, our own individual processes in life kind of mimic evolution, on a broad scale, in the sense that our environments are constantly changing, and we have all these capabilities to adapt to those environments. It's just a matter of do we consciously kind of step into the moment to take advantage of our evolutionary inheritance and start to, experiment with tools and strategies that can really help us to be what we want to be, to do what we want to do.
I really like that you're talking about this idea of consciousness, because something that's been playing in my mind for years at this point is humans are incredible in that I can wake up today and I can decide to do something different, or even to think something different, purely because I want to. I spent the last couple of weeks hunting. I'm a pretty avid hunter. The last couple of weeks hunting, I hunt pig and deer and moose and everything else. These animals, as far as I know, they don't get to decide if they're going to wake up and do something different than what they did yesterday. They're operating off intuition, Mother Nature, the way that they've been evolved. But they're not consciously thinking about, I'm going to wake up today, and I think instead of being angry, I'm going to be happy today. Or I'm going to wake up today, and instead of eating that bag of chips, I'm not going to eat the bag of chips, and I'm going to eat something healthier and go to the gym. Like, it's pretty powerful if you think about what we're capable of as humans relative to other animals in the animal kingdom.
Yeah, no, I think about this a lot. And I just got back from a trip to Panama. I was in the jungles of Panama. It was pretty incredible. And, when you're there, I mean, these are exactly the things that you think about. I went on this night hike, and someone had a black light, and we found a scorpion under a rock. And, there was like this red snake we couldn't identify, and frogs, and, all kinds of birds, and just seeing life with the various threads and interconnections and things. I think you can't help but be curious, about what other animals think and how do they decide what they do, and I feel like there's a lot more there than we probably know, just in terms of what they feel and what they think. But I think what's clear from the science, there's been a lot of research done to try to understand cognition and things like that in other creatures, that, what we have, exactly as you said, is quite special. And I think that, it's amazing to kind of think that, as special as it is, often we're only using a very small fraction of our human machinery, like our capabilities. And so, as you said, you could get up in the morning, and if you really are deliberate, you can accomplish amazing things. And it may not happen that day, but over time, just wanting something to happen, and you start bringing your awareness to it, you start thinking about it, you start noticing patterns in your conversations and in what you're seeing and observing in the world and the content that you're sort of consuming, you start to bring about those changes. And it's just amazing, like, what we truly are capable of.
Yeah, I mean, I'm fascinated with this. Again, to go back to the hunting thing, where I might be sitting in a blind or stalking an animal, and all I needed to do is take 2 steps to the left. That's all I need. Take 2 steps to the left, and this is done. And they'll take 1 step, and then they'll take the exact opposite step that I need them to take. And I think that speaks to the intuition, the senses they tap into, and then what I can't help but think in those moments is, what am I not tapping into? I'm operating under these systems. We think that animals, for example, are an inferior species, but we have access, to your point. We're only using a very small fraction of what is available to us. So I'd like to talk about, and I'm going to back up a little bit here because the name of your book is Lit. And I'd like to talk about what that means, because as I initially read it, I'm thinking, oh, this is flow, like getting into a flow state, but you call it flow 2.0. So I'd love to hear more about the lit theory, the lit system, whatever you want to call it, and then we can work backwards into how to apply some of these tools in our lives.
Absolutely. Yeah. One thing that you said, just to mention it, it's the type of thing that, sometimes I work up on a second level of our house, and, I put the blinder up and I look outside the window sometimes. And if I look at someone walking, sometimes they'll look at me right in the window, like they know, right? Like there is that, yet to be defined, sort of sixth sense or whatever you want to call it, right? Like there is something there, like you're describing with
Definitely.
the animals. And there's science is one of these kind of funny things where it's like, unless you have evidence for it, unless you have a lot of support for it, it's generally considered to not be true, and so, but there's so many things out there that we haven't discovered yet that, so anything that is now true is because we have scientific support. But if it's not sort of, if we don't have the support for it, we tend to discount it in science until the support is there. And so it's just a matter of time before we figure out what you're experiencing there with the animals, and, you're kind of interacting with them and they're sensing, you're sensing, and, we haven't just scientifically explored that enough. And, I just wanted to sort of, just sort of highlight some thoughts on that before we move on. But getting to lit. Lit has really been 7 years in the making, and actually when COVID hit, I had been focusing the book on productivity, and a series of events happened. I think we were all pretty substantially affected. I decided to transition it to intention and purpose, rather than just focus on productivity. There are a lot of tools I think that can help with productivity, but Lit to me is really, it's like that flash of inspiration, that spark that we all have access to at any potential moment, really the ability to light up our brains with intention. And I think that's what really separates it from Flow 1.0. So I'm very familiar with Flow because I've used it as a survival tool for my whole life, pretty much, having ADHD. People who have ADHD typically can get into a hyper-focused state for things that they're interested in. And what I realize is that I can actually get into a flow state almost on demand by procrastinating. So when I leave things to the last minute and the pressure builds up, then I'm actually able to really just, get into, get in the saddle and just go, for long periods of time. The thing, though, about flow, as helpful as it's been for productivity for me, and people can experience it in gaming and hunting and in sports and in all kinds of things. The issue, I think, one of the sort of like considerations about flow is that you could be engaged in something that you're not being deliberate about, or something you're not truly intentional about, like it could be something like you recognize that you want to focus more on something else in your life, but here you are. Like for me, that's a big part of the workaholic nature, was I was just always getting into flow state, just working hard, and I wasn't sort of stepping back and thinking like, am I really balancing out my life? Am I really prioritizing things the right way? Am I spending enough time with my family? Am I there for my children and my wife, like I really want to be? And so that's where I think Lit comes in, is that, one way to look at it is kind of a Flow 2.0, where it's tapping into this heightened state of awareness, bringing that to everything, but with this underlying really sort of deep sense of intention. And to me, intention is something that, I almost kind of look at intention, like I like to think of it as like there's this velocity of intention. So it's like the more and I think that kind of speaks to the process. It's not just like a switch, like, just sort of, it's like on or off. But to me, it's like, as I start to think about what I really want to do, what really drives me, what really is I'm most curious about, what are really my priorities, I start walking in those directions, taking steps, and it starts to build and build and build. And, it's like a ball rolling down a hill. It starts to gain more and more momentum. And so that's how I kind of look at LIT.
Yeah, well, I like that you're talking about the intentionality behind it, because when you were talking about productivity, it's easy to be productive. I mean, every single guy here today can just go be productive. But the question really is it towards something that you really want to do? If you were to go ask, for example, 100 people, hey, how you doing? I would bet that 80+% of them are going to say, oh, it's good, I'm busy. As if busy is the metric that we should all be striving for. I don't want to be busy. I do want to be productive. I do want to have fun. I do want to be joyful. I want to experience new things. I want to be challenged in a meaningful and significant way. But busy is the lowest benchmark I could possibly think of for success in my life. But it seems like we've been conditioned as a society to be busy. And I can't help but think about the ant farm that I had when I was, 7, 8 years old. And I would watch as this godlike figure over these ants scurrying around and mocking them for just being busy and scurrying around. And then there's a mountain right out here outside of my window, and I hike this mountain. It's a mile up, and I hike every once in a while. And I stand up there and I look down and I see all these little ants scurrying around, cars driving to and from work and other places and running errands. And that's me too. I'm not interested in that lifestyle. I mean, we have to do it to some degree, but I love the concept of intention versus just busy work or productivity.
Yeah, actually, you mentioned something about ants, and one of there was a researcher that I talk about in the book who actually many years ago, like maybe it was like 60, 70 years ago, was studying ants and realized that, we like to think of ants as really just kind of following orders and not going off the track. But he started putting obstacles in front of ants and started to realize that they were actually problem solving in different ways, where there was this like neurodiversity that applied to ants just like humans. And not all of them went the same way. some tried to go over the obstacle. Some tried to go around it one way or another way. Like, they were all kind of experimenting a little bit in their approach. And to me, I think that really, I don't know, it's almost like they have some intentionality. I mean, it's just hard to say, but like, to me, I like to think of it that way, that there's this intentionality and experimentation to really find the best path. Because when they found the shortest path, then they all went that way, like they were all able to, which was pretty amazing. And the other thing that really jumps into my mind is this sense. What I've really noticed is, and this is one of the tools in the book is called press pause. And I used to be one of those 80%, as you defined it, where I would just say, yeah, how you doing? Oh, I'm really busy, and it's kind of like, yeah, I'm busy, like that's a good thing. But what I realize is that here I am booking back-to-back meetings. And I get to the end of the day and I'm like, wow, I met with a lot of people. I feel like I've been productive and got a lot of things done. But then I started to notice something else, which is when I rarely, I'd have like a pause in between a meeting, like 20 minutes, half an hour, whatever it was. I started to recognize there was like this pattern recognition that kind of opened up to me, where it was like, wait a moment, when there's a break and I'm not just jumping to email or doing something else, but maybe I go for a walk or something. I started to think like, wow, like I'm starting to connect with what the person just said to me, and I'm starting to connect it to other thoughts I have or other pieces of information in my mind or other people that I know. And I'm like, wait, I should introduce that person to X. And maybe we should all get together and, that would help us advance this project that we're working on. So like, in other words, it's like if we're so busy, we actually miss these opportunities for extremely valuable insights and sort of pieces of information or ways to connect things, ways to do lateral thinking and to really connect dots that are right there, but we don't make the time to connect them.
Well, and I think the real problems of the world are solved when it's not, as the adage goes, a mile wide and an inch deep. Like, we need to get deeper. And also we've heard things like how many problems and solutions have been created on a walk. And that's certainly been true anecdotally of my life. I could be frustrated about something or be stuck on something, and I could go for a 30-minute walk around the neighborhood without any earbuds in, without any podcasts or anything else. Just go walk. Not even any expectation of anything. Just go walk and be quiet. And the solution is there within, 10 minutes of going on my walk. It's pretty phenomenal. I think the challenge, though, if you're a guy like me, and I imagine for you as well, sitting in silence, or pausing as you call it, doesn't seem productive. So we take those pauses, at least I do, and we try to fill it with nonsense. So how does a guy who is highly productive, high achieving, ambitious, driven, motivated, convince himself, or maybe there's a better word for that, to pause, margin, take a step back, and do nothing in between those busy periods?
Yeah, no, it can be tough to do that initially, and certainly talk with people who they have a system that works and that they like, and they're just fine kind of going about it. I think on the other hand, you have people who sort of notice there's this kind of inner desire for possibility. There's this sort of sense that, like, maybe if I did things differently, it could be better, or I could sort of take more advantage of the time that I have, or if I was to go a bit deeper, if I was to meet with a few less people, or sort of strategize in a different way, that maybe I could do even better, maybe even have a better sense of well-being, or a better sense of health, or these kinds of things. And I think that there are these tiny steps that we can take, and there's experimentation that we can do as well. Like, you could just 1 week you just sort of plan for a 20-minute break or 15-minute break in between, and don't do anything, and just sort of see what happens. Just let your mind go for a walk, like you said. So I think there are ways that we can just sort of experiment and not commit. And by the way, I'm kind of like of the mindset that practices are really important. It's very important to practice things, but also that you don't necessarily have to do that your whole life. And practices can actually get in the way of life if you sort of make them too regimented, right? Because what happens is there may be other practices that you're curious about that you might miss if you just focus on that one practice, even though it's getting monotonous and you're still, you're sort of just, kind of sluggish and bringing yourself to that practice every day. So I think there can be these, like, when we sort of start paying attention to the cues, cues from our minds. Our bodies are very intelligent. The cues that we're getting from other people around us, we might sort of start to think like maybe there are these other possibilities of ways of doing things, and maybe there's a tiny step that we can just take and just see what happens, and we might find completely new practices that even serve us better.
Well, so when you're talking about these cues, what might that look like? I mean, I know, for example, today, I'm not feeling awesome today. I'm a little under the weather, nursing a little bit of a minor, cold or some congestion or something, no big deal. But I recognize that. And so I don't have a very busy day. I've got this conversation with you. I've got a couple emails and things I need to send out. But I did that deliberately and intentionally because I see that cue. But it hasn't always been like that. So how do you begin to identify what those cues are? Because I think you're right. I think the body and the mind are intelligent and will give you signals and clues. Sometimes we overlook them. Yeah.
I think there are a lot of ways to kind of tap into it, and I use a variety of strategies. One is, for example, let's say you mentioned going on a walk and kind of being able to problem solve. If you go on a walk and you don't have your devices with you, and I find that's actually easiest to not have or go on my devices if I set an intention. Like if I go on a walk and I say, okay, I just want to be open to what are the thoughts that are going to run through my mind during this walk. I'm just like sort of kind of look at it from that perspective to say, okay, I know there are going to be a bunch of thoughts. I'll think about some of the things I see, but what am I going to ruminate on during this walk, and sort of just go into it like that to get a sense for, where is my mind drifting? So it's almost like a meditation, but you're just walking around, but you kind of have this you're focusing your attention on what is your mind gravitating towards, what's it hooking onto, what's it looping on, so I think that's one of the ways I think that we can tap into the cues. What are the things that are bothering us, what are the things that are on the top of our mind, what's repetitive, what's cycling through. I think another way to do it as well is I got this app on my phone. It's a really simple app called Mind Jogger. It's a free app, and what it does is you can write into it a sentence, and then you pick from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. it's going to ping you 10 random times and just say it's going to ping you with an alert and give you that sentence. So sometimes what I'll do is, let's say I'm maybe not in a great mental state. I'm trying to figure out what's going on. Am I really in a bad mental state? Am I in a good state? I don't really know. So I put in this line like, how you doing? Or I was listening to another podcast and they put are you above or below the line, right? And the line is just the line of kind of being in a good state above and a bad state below. And I just had it ping me 10 times throughout the day, 2-3 days. And it was 99% of the time I was in a good place, and it was just but I felt like sometimes you get a cue and I feel like a negative cue and I'm like, okay, this is me. I'm in this negative state. But using this app, there's just this random pings. It gave me a sense of no, things are good. Everything is actually going okay. There are some things I need to work on and do. But so that was a way for me to sort of cue in or clue into these, the sort of state that my mind was in. And I use it actually. The other thing I do is I put in there sometimes I put, you can do it, right? I put that in. So 5 times throughout the day, it just pings me and says, you can do it, whatever I'm doing in that moment. And I can't tell you how much of there's this little rush of positive energy that just fills me when I see that, even though I know it's me doing it to me, it's not even anybody else kind of involved, but I just feel there's all these little things that we can do throughout our day to just, kind of bring in fresh energy and help us to achieve what we want to achieve.
Yeah, I'm glad you can customize that, because if I kept getting pinged throughout the day, even if it was for myself, I'd probably pick up my damn phone and throw it across the room. So I'd have to set the schedule. I'm like, leave me alone. I'm working right now. I can't hear from you.
Yeah.
One of the things that you said, you were talking about what bothers you, I think is the term that you used. And that's actually a section of the book. You talk about get bothered, right? And I'd love for you to expand on that. And this is something that we often talk about, is there's some things in this life that you're bothered by. Maybe it's some sort of injustice or some sort of problem that you've dealt with. Maybe it's minor, maybe it's major. And you maybe have experienced that personally, and you're in a unique position to be able to solve those problems. That has been invaluable in my life, because I don't need to solve all the problems, just the ones I'm personally bothered by.
Yeah. So this is such a powerful tool to really get in touch with what truly bothers you. And I think, there's different kind of ways of looking at it, different sort of levels of being bothered. But I mean, in let's say just for now, sort of we're going to think about this in the context of your skill set, or, something that you can actually do something about, like how you framed it. And I like to think of it as a pain point. When you have a pain, it really captivates your attention. And when your attention's captivated, you try to lessen that pain. You do whatever you can. And so it's almost like, how do we use that then as a tool? How do we create a pain point for a problem that we want to solve? Because as a way, it's really tapping into motivation. So I'll give you an example. So my laboratory was based for several years near MIT in Cambridge. And I had this opportunity to move it to the Longwood medical area, which is right in Boston, right near, so to be right in the hospital, really, in Brigham and Women's Hospital. It's like this hotbed for new medical therapies, but also lots of hospitals and things, So we have Boston Children's Hospital is there. There's Dana-Farber. There's Beth Israel. But to be in the hospital. So I made the move, and it was incredible because now when I go into my lab, I walk past many patients. Like, I'm seeing them every day. Like, these are the people that we're designing the therapies to treat. And that adds an extra layer of motivation. I'm bothered by it. I'm bothered to see people, struggling and, coming in ambulances and, having all kinds of different ailments. And I see that every single day. And that, is sort of like tapping into this ability to be bothered, but use that energy to then fuel me to, work even harder and smarter and really try to focus on what truly is most important in our work.
I like that. Yeah, you're intimately familiar with how your work. I maybe say it this way: is that you're deeply connected to the solutions that you're providing, right? You can see them in real time and how they're actually impacting people. That's one thing I envy about people who work with their hands. You see a builder, a contractor, he can drive down the road and say, I built that house. I did the heating and air on that house. I did that landscaping. I fixed that car. I love that about blue collar work and those guys who actually work with their hands, because it's very tangible what they do. And there's some immense value in that.
Yeah. And I think that, the other side of it, yeah, exactly. In the beginning is like they see the problem. They probably feel, whatever they're working on, they can feel the pain from the person who's dealing with it. And, I think, as humans, we can feel each other's pain. I mean, we can feel animals' pain as well, right? I mean, if we're sort of open to it and aware, but like to be able to sort of connect on the pain and then be able to solve that pain, yeah, I mean, on a daily basis, that's, it's a pretty incredible way to live your life. And I think that, I mean, to me, there's this social justice leader, Brian Stevenson, and I think he just frames it really well. And he says, stay proximate to the problem. So essentially, if you're trying to solve a problem, or if, you feel a pain point to help people who, are there's injustice being done to them, or, people who are going hungry and, you want to do something about it. Like you want to go into those communities and you want to feel that pain, because that's really going to allow you to tap into the motivation to a maximal level so that you can, really keep on track and really do your best work.
Conversely, there's a segment of your book where you talk about this concept of activation energy. And it was really interesting as you're going through that, because you were really talking about what I would say maybe synonymously is greasing the grooves, right? Making something really, really easy, because it takes an immense amount of energy to start a new task, a new project, a new assignment. And you're talking about cutting out all the things that would keep you from doing that by making it easy. One simple example of that might be, if I'm going to go work out in the morning, I need to lay my clothes out the night before. I need to have my workout scheduled. I already know what I'm going to do. And then I'm going to have my food and or pre-workout already ready to go. So there's not a whole lot of extra energy that goes into me doing the thing that I'm really committed to doing tonight. Because tomorrow, when it's 5 a.m., it might be a different story.
Yeah, exactly. There's so many examples like that. I mean, the example for me last summer was a friend of mine called me while he was on his bike, and he's like, Jeff, being on my bike is my happy place. And I immediately was like, I have a bike. Why am I not biking? Because it's my happy place too. Like I love biking. I mean, I just feel like in some ways, sometimes just exploring, having no particular route, but just like on the weekend going around in the neighborhood, or, doing like a 40-mile bike ride somewhere I've never gone before. And I mean, it's just so exhilarating. And I was like, but I'm not doing it. And I was like, okay, well, probably if I go home and say I want to go for a bike ride, it's just not going to happen, because I think we get in this habit of actually practicing not achieving our goals. We set the goals to be too big, too grandiose. And so I think we can flip that by really breaking things down into these tiny steps that reduce the activation energy. So I'll come back to the bike in a moment, but the concept of activation energy is something that really struck me I think it was like in high school, where in a chemistry class, a teacher, brought it to everyone's attention when they were talking about a chemical reaction. They said, okay, put two chemicals in water and they don't react. And then you add a little bit of heat and they don't react. And then you add more heat and they start moving, and a little more heat, and then they bombard together and a reaction occurs. And that's the activation energy, how much heat you had to put or energy into the system. And being someone who was just struggling and things, and I was like, wow, I bet I could bring that to everything in my life, this idea of activation energy. And I started thinking, like, everything I do, there's a certain amount of energy or effort I need to put into it. But wait a moment, I could probably make it easy by lowering the activation energy. There's ways to do that. And actually in chemistry class, you can actually do that, by adding like, a catalyst or an enzyme, or, there's ways to actually reduce the amount of heat you need to put in. And so in the case, kind of going back to the bike, I thought, okay, well, what can I do to make this easy? And exactly as you just said, I got my bike, I put some air in the tires one day. Next day, I cleaned it up, wiped it down. Next day, I hung my helmet on the handlebar and I put the bike right where I would walk by it every single day. So all I needed was like 15 minutes, to free time to get on the bike and just go for a couple loops around the neighborhood. And this past summer, I rode over 1,000 miles.
Wow. Yeah, that's very cool. But I guess my question then is, at one point, does that become a hindrance? Because I think a lot of the times we can say we're doing the thing when we're not actually, we're just preparing to do the thing. So, for example, you might really have a goal to call a certain amount of clients today to set up sales conversations. And you can convince yourself, and I've done this, that studying up on how to talk with prospects or how to cold call or go to the events or read a bunch of books on it, you can convince yourself that you're actually doing the thing that you said you were going to do, but you're not. You're just procrastinating in a very creative, confusing way that's not actually moving you towards your goals.
Yeah, no, I definitely have been there before many times. And I think that, I think that it's really about framing the steps in a particular way, and sometimes you need to create some accountability in the process, and people can do that in different ways. One way is maybe that you have a partner that you're working with or someone else, that you're friendly with, and you kind of decide, hey, we're both going to try to achieve X this day, or make it like a friendly competition, or, you know what I mean? Like, I feel like there's other ways to, when you sort of start to be open to those cues that you're really just stuck in the drum rolls and you're not like, kind of moving out of them. I think that's exactly an opportunity where we can say to ourselves, okay, what are other strategies? Because I think that's another key thing that we can all tune into, is that often we only see a narrow range of possibilities for anything that we're doing, but there's many, many, many more possibilities out there. So, if you're kind of stuck in that, sort of preparation, never get to the final thing, you can start to think, all right, well, what if I chatted with some of my colleagues and see what are their strategies, or, team up with them and sort of make a little bit of a challenge. I think there's all kinds of little techniques and things that you can do, and even just bringing your awareness to it, like sort of thinking like, okay, I know I'm not doing what I want. I'm going to observe other people. I'm just going to see what their strategies are, and I'm, going to start to engage them. And, maybe there's certain books or things, or maybe there's even other things. Maybe it's that what you need to do is change something else in your life. Like maybe you need to flood your brain with more positive neurotransmitters by having more of a exercise regimen in the morning, and then that will fuel you, make you feel better. And through the day, it'll lower the activation energy to execute on, making those phone calls.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I've been trying to be very conscious of lately is tying my results that I used to just chalk up to maybe just happenstance or circumstances, very passive, to actual ways that I'm doing things, not just how I'm showing up, but things that I might be doing with exercise, for example, or one that comes to mind is diet. Like I would love to eat a certain kind of food all day, every day, but I know how that bag of chips and salsa is going to make me feel. And I've been a lot more aware of tying the result or how I feel physically, mentally, emotionally to little small behaviors that I didn't used to correlate.
Yeah, no, I've been there too. Yeah, I mean, and you mentioned the chips and the salsa. I just went for my physical, and that's something that I need to cut back on exactly because my cholesterol's going up a bit, and the saturated fats that you get in these like kind of fried chips and things like that. So, but I think there's a lot of things like, when we start to, like for me, it's like having the doctor tell me, like that sort of motivate, that reduces the activation energy to be like, to see the actual data. And it's what you said, like, I think when we start to clue into how we feel, like if there's certain foods, like I started drinking, for example, a friend of mine has cacao and I started drinking it because I was like, wow, this is like a full body coffee experience. Like it totally was like, I just felt like fully alive and I loved it. But then I was like, wait, why is my stomach bothering me? And, why am I having like bloating and this isn't good? And I was like, I didn't want it to be the cacao. So I started, kind of moving other things out. And, and then eventually I just, it just sort of built up and I put it in I basically moved it to a location like high up on the shelf where I wouldn't see it every day when I opened the drawer to, make my breakfast. And sure enough, like my stomach normalized, so it's kind of like, how do we sort of lower the activation energy by, sometimes we need to move things out of our sight because, with the case of the bike, seeing the bike is helpful to get on it. But for me, seeing the cacao is not helpful to avoid it.
Yeah. Are you familiar with James Clear and his work, specifically Atomic Habits?
Yeah. It's a fantastic book.
Yeah, I think we're talking about very similar things right here because he talks about making it more difficult to do the things that you don't want to do, like drinking, for example. Just don't buy alcohol. I mean, that's not going to keep you from drinking if you really want to, but it reduces your opportunity and creates a larger barrier to drinking than if it was above the fridge and you can grab it on a moment's notice. So I think creating those barriers for the things that you don't want to do, but then greasing the grooves or looking for reducing activation energy for the things that you want to do is going to be invaluable. But, to go back to what we were saying about taking action versus planning on taking action, right? Those are two different things. And I think both are necessary. I also think there might be a case to be made, and you correct me if I'm wrong, for it's more of a values-based decision. So a value might be one that I have, and this one is very important for me, is I value taking action. Taking action towards my goals, dreams, desires, etc., is something I place as a high priority. Another value that might actually conflict with that value at times is making sure that what I put out in the world is the best, right? And so you have this idea of perfection. I have to put out something that's going to solve the problems, that's going to look good, that has all of the little kinks worked out before I ever introduce it. So I think if you're somebody who, and this I think is a mindset thing, but if you're somebody who is maybe more of that analytical thinking, planning type, maybe you ought to think more about the values towards action. And if you're more like me, who places a higher emphasis on taking action, maybe it would be better for me to place a little bit higher priority on making sure that I strategically think about what I'm offering and presenting to the world. What do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I think it's great, and to me, one of the ways that I've embraced that, let's say in my laboratory, because I think really what you're getting at is also this neurodiversity in terms of how we really think differently and how we operate differently and how we define importance differently and how we structure our days differently. And to me, there's this strength of being in a room with people who do things differently and sort of observing and sort of instead of saying like, this is my way and that's your way, I kind of look at it and say, like, I'm curious about your way. Like, maybe I could try this and see how it works and we can find ways to be more productive, be more purposeful. In my lab, just to give you an example, most scientific labs are populated with sort of somebody like the same discipline, like they're all biologists or immunologists or engineers. But what I've tried to do is actually populate my lab with where there's minimal overlap in the expertise of the people. So we have chemical engineers, mechanical engineers, electrical engineers, biologists, immunologists. We've had a gastrointestinal surgeon. We've had a cardiac surgeon. We've had a dentist in the lab, constantly changing. And so when we're sitting around a table brainstorming, trying to come up with ideas to solve medical problems, everybody can provide a unique perspective. Everybody has access to information and tools and skills that others don't have. And so everyone immediately feels validated because no one else can bring what they're bringing. And, it also maximizes the potential for us to have multiple shots on goal in terms of just all these different ideas of technologies and how we might build them. Pardon me. So I think there's this incredible, and we can do this in our personal lives as well. Like we can surround ourselves with people who do things differently and who are maybe equally as productive or impactful. And start to think like, okay, maybe there's little steps that I could take to try some of the things that people around me have been doing. And by the way, this is like the story of my life because I struggled so much when I was a kid. I had to observe other people. I had to learn tools and strategies and sort of mimic what other people were doing and experiment just, to survive. And so to me, I like what you're saying because it's really about, it sounds like, you're open to different ways of doing things and sort of this idea that if you combine something that someone else is doing with what you're doing, you may get to a place where you're even more efficient or more impactful in your work.
Well, and I think it's important you're talking because what you're talking about is, you hear this phrase all the time, diversity is our strength. Well, if our diversity is based on immutable characteristics, then no, I don't agree with that. Possibly, but that's not correlated. It just happens to be. If you're basing diversity on the color of your skin or your sex, for example, that doesn't necessarily give you any other advantage than if you all look the same. But I think what you're talking about is actual diversity in experience, thoughts, beliefs, value systems, cultural beliefs, upbringing, backgrounds. And that's where it can actually be a strength because we're coming at it with a different perspective. I heard a little anecdote one time, and there was a bunch of engineers that had built this bridge, and they built this bridge around this crane. But after the fact, they realized they couldn't lower the crane low enough to get under the beam to get the actual crane out from underneath the bridge they built around it. And so these engineers came in and they tried to figure out, how do we lower it? What can we move? Can we bend something? Can we do this? Can we disassemble the crane? Like, what can we do? And again, it's just an anecdote, but a little kid came by and he walked by and he's like, well, why don't you just lower the air pressure on the tires and then back it out, And sure enough, lower the air pressure on the tires, back the crane out, no problem. And I think that speaks to the diversity that you're talking about. That's a different thing than just immutable characteristics, which is what so many people I think are caught up on these days. Is like, let's just look different. No, I want people who think different. That's what I'm more interested in.
Yeah. I mean, we've had people from 30 different countries in my laboratory, and to me, it's like every country, has a different education system. Different people are sort of have different ways of thinking, and we're working on some really hard problems, and we need all sorts of different ways of thinking and different skill sets and things like that. So I think diversity can really be enormously powerful. When we sort of when we have these teams of people who just, as you said, think differently, have different skills, different knowledge, and I thrive. I mean, the other thing that I like about that is it creates a bit of friction too. Like let's say if I have I'm not a mechanical engineer, but I'm working beside a mechanical engineer, and now we have to, we're talking to each other. There's some barriers in terms of what I know and how I say things and what they say and what they know. But there's also this incredible opportunity to learn from them. And I think when we sort of embrace new things in our lives every day, our brains love novelty. And so, you can get that by surrounding yourself with people who think differently, because then that gets you curious. And, when your curiosity starts flowing, your brain just totally lights up.
Yeah, no, I think what you're saying is absolutely true. Diversity is not easy. Like, it's easier to find people who are exactly like you because you all agree. That's way easier than having somebody come in who's clearly an expert in the field or knows what they're talking about, educated, smart, intelligent, but fighting you, pushing back on you. And it's really hard. And that's where the humility comes in. And you talk about humility in your book as well. But I do want to hit on something that you just mentioned. You talked about curiosity, and that is such a huge thing. Also, I think I read in the book, and I can't remember if I'm conflating this with another book I read, but the process of experimentation and allowing yourself permission to play is what I call it. Like, just play. We put such a heavy emphasis on everything. Like, if I do this and it goes wrong, the world is going to end. No, it's not going to end. Even in a business environment, maybe you'll be out a little bit money, you'll be out a little bit of time, but you learn something from that. And giving myself permission to play, even just in enjoyment in life, trying new things, has been invaluable, specifically over the past 6 months for me.
Yeah. No, I was just in Panama, I was saying, and my wife and I brought our daughter with, who's 15, and it's amazing, like, how the bonding, let's say, between me and my daughter is different, at home versus like on a trip. And one of the things I noticed is that, exactly to that point, that there was just a lot more kind of playful interaction. And, for example, I mean, these are just like kind of perhaps ridiculous things, but like at night, I like to try to I just randomly come up with songs in my head, and sometimes I don't really, I say them in the house or whatever, but, I was just kind of coming up with raps. And so we were like rapping together, like we were coming up with raps about things we saw that day, and, it wasn't really working perfectly, but every once in a while there'd be a good line, and it was just, it was this incredible, like, feeling, right? And then bonding feeling at the same time. And I just think that there's so many, like, our culture is sort of, it sort of constrains us, like it really, like the culture like atomizes our attention. It really kind of cubes our time, and I think it like flattens our imagination, and we don't play as much as, like, and it's kind of like you look at kids and you just see this free flowingness to the whole situation, and so with I just find there's these, and even with my son too, he's 18. I was thinking about I feel like the play happens mostly on the trips, like when you have your guard down, you're not like with the back-to-back meetings, you don't come home and you sort of have this heaviness to you because you've been through the ringer, all day. And I feel like, there's ways that we can really build that more into our lives, because, it feels, the other thing it does, it regenerates us. Like, it really rejuvenates our minds and sort of refreshes and lights up our brains in ways that allow us to then, when we get back to work, we can think with more fresh perspectives, and we have more sort of cognitive capability and endurance, So I really think it's a great thing.
Yeah, I think that one of the biggest barriers to that play or that experimentation is just the amount of expectations that we put on ourselves, right? I've got to show up, I've got to perform, I've got to do this. This has to play out this way, and then it becomes very controlling and maybe even manipulative, because you've already determined what the outcome has to be. So anything that deviates from that in the process is a barrier to what you've already identified in your mind.
Yeah.
I always wonder about that with the scientific method a little bit. You guys as scientists, you come to the table with a hypothesis, but you're willing, if you're an actual scientist, and that's to be determined, because I think this is permeating throughout society, is that a scientist, using this term loosely, will have a predetermined outcome, and then they'll create a scenario or an experimentation to prove what they've already decided is going to be. But I think the real scientific process is, this is what I think will have happen, but I'm open to something else happening.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. No, I like that you said that because I think that, I mean, well, there's a lot there, let's just say, right, of what you've just said. I mean, I feel like we could talk about that for a long time. And the scientific process to me is curious. And I have seen that where, people say, here's what I think, and then they conduct the experiment to prove what they thought
Right.
versus to
Right.
determine whether, are they really trying to answer a question. Yeah, I mean, just sort of on your earlier point, I just wanted to bring up something that I think is was relevant. Something that I started in my lab many years ago, which is I call it the 3-minute presentations. And so a couple times a year, what we do is everybody in the lab presents on something they're curious about, and we encourage people not to present on science. They can do anything, and it's a competition. And so people come in and they present for 3 minutes, and then there's a few minutes of critiques. And people, rather than ask questions about what was presented, they say what did they like or dislike about the presentation, the actual process of presenting. And then at the end, I give like $40, $50 like gifts, like things that people really want, as prizes, and everybody votes on the best presenter and the best critiquer. And so we've had people who come in, and actually we were talking about rapping. There was a guy who was a rapper in my lab, and he wrote a rap on all the burger restaurants in and around Boston. And so that was one thing, and people loved it. Someone came in and breakdanced. They were a breakdancer, and they explained what breakdancing was all about. Someone was a surfer. They came in a wetsuit, and they talked about surfing. So it was like all of these. And to me,
That's
that
amazing.
was like, it was incredible because, it was like cultivating play. Like people were talking about what they loved, like often, something they were like a hobby or just something that they're really excited about. And it kind of created this environment where people got to know each other. It just served so many goals at the same time. But it encouraged play, in the group. It really, I think, and it also instilled this like curiosity and helped people to be more creative because they get ideas from other people's presentations to try the next time, and it just like, it's been just a blast to do it.
I wrote that down. I'm actually going to incorporate that. We've got a brotherhood is what I call it, but we've got 1,000+ men that we all work together in small teams. And I'm going to encourage our team leaders to incorporate that so these guys can do their 3-minute presentations. It reminds me a little bit of like show and tell when we were in elementary school. And you were so excited to present whatever your thing was, and everybody else was curious about what your thing was going to be. That's a really cool idea. I like that a lot.
Yeah. And I feel, again, it's like, one of the most watched TED Talks of all time, Ken Robinson, he spoke about, pardon me, Ken Robinson spoke about how the education system educates us out of being creative. And I think, beyond that, it educates us out of being curious and it educates us even out of asking questions. Like all of us have been shamed at some point in our life for asking a question and been like, hey, that's a stupid question. And so not only do we not ask questions as often as we, could be productive and useful for us, but because of that, we haven't honed our skill of asking questions. And asking questions is a gateway to our curiosity and our creativity. Because when we ask questions, we focus on the answers. We start to take the information that's given to us. It more easily imprints in our minds, and then we can also connect it to what else we know, so we can do more lateral thinking. And then when we do that, we start to think about, next steps, and, we start to be creative about it. And I think that, to me, one of the greatest tools of all that I just use every day is intentional questions, and it can help people connect with each other as well. And then when you connect, listening just deepens that connection.
Well, it also helps people flesh out their ideas. I've presented an idea, for example, in this brotherhood I'm talking about, and I've had guys ask me questions. I'm like, yeah, I don't know. I really hadn't thought about that. I probably ought to think about that so that I can make sure that either I articulate this a little bit more effectively or reconsider what it is I'm considering implementing right now. So those questions are powerful in so many ways.
Yeah, actually, if it's okay, I'll read you like 5 sentences from the book about questions.
Please do.
Okay. So this is from Lit. Questions are like excavation equipment, versatile tools for action. Questions can cut like a backhoe through old assumptions, or like an archaeologist's trowel and brush that uncover buried artifacts or gems, or like the sculptor's chisel that releases a masterpiece from a slab of marble. Or think of a Swiss Army knife, the everything tool. A sharp question can pry the lid open on a conversation, cut to the core of a matter, tighten the screws of a loose concept. You can use a question to accelerate a conversation or slow it down to allow time for reflection.
Good stuff. I like that. And the book is filled with all sorts of stuff like that. Well, Jeff, if you would, let the guys know where to connect with you. Obviously, you know, we've been talking about it. Life Ignition Tools Lit is the name of the book. And I've read it. It's a great book. I'm implementing some of these things in my own life personally. So where should the guys go to connect with you, learn more about what you're up to, and pick up their copy of Lit as well?
Absolutely. So I just set up a website, just went live a couple days ago. It's Jeff Karp, K-A-R-P. It could be a C, but it's K. So jeffkarp.com, it has all the information about the book and actually a link to my lab as well. We've developed all kinds of technologies like glues that can seal holes inside a beating heart. We've developed needles that stop in between the layers of the eye to deliver gene therapy to the back of the eye.
I saw that. That's wild.
Nasal sprays that can prevent, we're working on to try to prevent the transmission of airborne diseases, and nanoparticles that target the brain to treat neurological disorders and things like that.
So many fascinating things. Man, I'm excited about the work that you're doing, and I appreciate you sharing some of that in this book, but also coming on the podcast. Thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I've really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you.